Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, the LGBT Life Center held a fundraiser for its HIV education services. WHRO's Barry Graham tells us all about that event. A shortage of skilled shipyard workers is causing delays in building and maintaining Navy ships. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh looked into it.
Anything that needs a skilled trade, we're fighting those demands.
And a group of former slaves once found economic independence harvesting oysters in Suffolk. WHRO's Katherine Hafner brings us the story of one woman keeping their legacy alive. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. A local nonprofit recently got a $500,000 federal grant to expand public access to the Great Dismal Swamp. WHRO's Katherine Hafner has more.
The Great Dismal Swamp National Wildlife Refuge spans 113,000 acres across Suffolk, Chesapeake, and North Carolina. But many Hampton Roads residents don't even know it exists. Here's Lucky Lukowski, co-president of the Friends of the Great Dismal Swamp.
They take the interstates around it, but they don't realize that this huge resource is there. It's astounding at the awareness that has not been put upon the refuge.
His organization is working to change that, along with partners including the Nansemond Indian Nation. They plan to expand trails and build a new pavilion where people can gather for field trips and outdoor concerts. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Marines at Camp Lejeune and the Norfolk-based USS Wasp are completing a final workup before leaving for the Middle East as tensions continue to rise there. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh was in North Carolina for the exercise.
The USS Wasp and the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit are in their final weeks of training. They are conducting a mock evacuation of a U.S. embassy as 150 actors portraying protesters scream at the Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Adam Coker is the Marines' executive officer.
This gives us a chance to practice the things that we can most likely expect: non-combatant evacuation operation and embassy reinforcement, foreign humanitarian assistance, disaster relief.
Landing craft from the USS Wasp arrive at Onslow Beach with food and supplies. Major Mark Moore says they're watching the conflict between Israel, Hamas, and Iran.
We do watch the news. We also receive intelligence and operations updates. Part of what we're doing here is to prepare for the unknown and respond to crisis.
This is the last exercise before the sailors and Marines deploy. It has been nearly a month since the USS Baton and its Marines arrived back in Norfolk from the eastern Mediterranean. So far, the Marines say the Pentagon has not sped up the Wasp departure time. They're still on schedule to leave for the Mediterranean sometime in May. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
The annual Dine Out for Life event was held nationwide and also here in Hampton Roads last night. It's a fundraiser for the LGBT Life Center and their HIV education, awareness, and outreach services. WHRO's Barry Graham has the details.
Restaurants and bars across the region donated a portion of their sales to the LGBT Life Center, who had ambassadors greet patrons and offer information about the services provided there, including HIV testing and education. Stacey Walls is director of the LGBT Life Center.
This organization started 35 years ago as an AIDS service organization serving women and children living with HIV. That is our history. That's what we were born out of. And so back in 2011, we expanded our mission a bit and we became an LGBTQ community center that provides HIV services. And so HIV is still the core at all of the services that we provide, but we also recognize we want to work with people before they become HIV positive. We don't want to have more diagnoses. And so, we work a lot in our prevention programs to make sure people stay healthy.
The LGBT Life Center grew out of the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s. Over 1.2 million people are living with HIV in the U.S. In Hampton Roads, over 7,500 people have the disease. Treatment, awareness, and advancement in preventative measures has helped to halt its spread and make HIV a manageable condition. though many remember the dark years of the epidemic. Early mention of the disease was found in the local gay newspaper Our Own in 1981 with an article about a new strain of pneumonia targeting gay men. By the mid-1980s, a pandemic had ensued. That's when a group known as the Tidewater AIDS Crisis Task Force formed as it came to grips with the ravages of AIDS in the community. Other organizations soon emerged.
There were multiple organizations at the time, and TACT being the largest one at the time. But there were, Full Circle AIDS Hospice Support and Candy House and TACT, and then even Urban League did a lot of HIV work back in those days, and Williamsburg AIDS Network and Peninsula AIDS Foundation. So all of those were the organizations that kind of came to life during the early HIV epidemic.
In 2011, the LGBT Center of Hampton Roads opened, and despite major advancement in the treatment of HIV, there remains a need for outreach and education about the disease. Dine Out for Life was launched as a fundraiser in 1999. This year, 51 restaurants and bars participated, each giving a portion of their day's receipts to the Life Center. Corey Moore is Director of Communications for the LGBT Center. He said the event is successful due to the local community connection it creates.
Anytime the community has an opportunity to gather and celebrate each other, our family, our loved ones, and on top of it, contribute to a good cause and a local community-based organization, I think people jump at the opportunity for the ease of it, for the connection, for the community, for the fun.
Calvin Horsley dined out at MJ's Tavern in Norfolk. The gay-friendly establishment is donating 50% of its proceeds to the Life Center.
Well, it's important to me to support the gay community and the LGBT Center. And MJ's is like family to me and my second home.
In addition to the money raised, Stacey Walsh said that Dine Out for Life creates a new awareness about HIV and the services provided by the LGBT Life Center.
The exposure and the awareness to HIV during this event really renews the commitment to it. And I think that the center has been the largest HIV community provider for years. And so it's really great to bring awareness to the cause. It's also really important to tell people that it's still incredibly important to support.
You can find out more about the LGBT Life Center and their HIV education efforts at lgbtlifecenter.org. For WHRO News, I'm Barry Graham.
A former Hampton Roads sailor was convicted of spying, but we still don't know for whom. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says most of the incidents happened while he was stationed in Virginia.
Chief Petty Officer Bryce Pedicini was convicted of attempted espionage and 2 other violations of military law Friday in a Navy courtroom in San Diego. He had been charged with 8 counts of espionage, mainly related to his time in Hampton Roads. From February 2022 to April 2023, Pedicini was a student at the Surface Combat Systems Training Command at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center in Norfolk. Portions of the week-long trial were held behind closed doors, the Navy citing national security concerns. So far, the Navy has not released the name of the country that approached Pedicini. His defense counsel said in court that the sailor thought he was writing research papers for a contact in Japan. NCIS Director Omar Lopez called Pedicini's acts a betrayal. Pedicini was arrested while he was assigned to the USS Higgins in Japan and was taken to San Diego for trial. He's scheduled to be sentenced May 7th. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
The nation's first freestanding hospice house opened Tuesday in Virginia Beach. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson was there.
The 12-bed Desorts Hospice House is the first non-hospital facility that offers 24-hour medical care for people at the end of their lives. It's a private venture jump-started by a donation of land from the city of Virginia Beach. Governor Glenn Youngkin praised city leaders and the people who planned and fundraised for the house.
It makes me proud as a Virginian, and it particularly makes me proud as someone who grew up here in Virginia Beach, that we all get to say together, yes, we are here for you. Maybe temporary, but it is home.
Old Dominion University last year estimated Hampton Roads needed at least 45 hospice beds to keep up with demand. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
North Carolina Disability Rights is suing the state's Department of Health and Human Services in federal court, saying long waits for mental health care violate the civil rights of incarcerated people. WFAE's Steve Harrison has this report.
The complaint says part of the problem is North Carolina doesn't have enough available beds. It says that since 2022, defendants with mental disabilities wait an average of nearly 5 months to be placed at any of the state's 3 psychiatric hospitals. A 10-person in-jail restoration unit is already up and running in the Mecklenburg jail, and the state says another unit will soon start operation in Wake County. I'm Steve Harrison.
The Navy faces delays in building and maintaining ships because it cannot find enough qualified shipyard workers. Industry experts say it's a complex problem caused by everything from America's shrinking industrial base to the fallout from COVID-19. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
Charles Spivey came to Newport News, Virginia 40 years ago from North Carolina to work in the shipbuilding industry. For the last 6 years, he's been president of United Steelworkers Local 8888. Their 12,000 shipbuilders work at Huntington Ingalls, Inc.
There's only one company in the world that can produce a nuclear power aircraft carrier, and that's right here in the city where we do it.
The Navy recently announced that most of its new ships are behind schedule, including the nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines produced in Newport News. One of the biggest problems is the difficulty finding skilled tradespeople. Roughly 1.4 million manufacturing jobs were lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of these people haven't come back, Spivey says.
COVID gave you an opportunity to explore, because some of these people that was at home or laid off or took a break, they had to find work, and they did find work, and you probably lost some of your skilled people.
Shipbuilding is still a good living, paying $30 or more per hour with quality health care and retirement benefits, though other sectors of the economy have become more competitive at a time when every manufacturer is clamoring for skilled workers. Spivey says newer workers often expect to move up the ladder. Fewer people want to spend a lifetime honing a skill.
I remember my mentor. He wanted to be the best truck driver he could be. He didn't need management. He didn't need anything.
I'm Mary Cupp, and I'm a marine painter here at the shipyard, and I've been here 3 years.
Cupp has been working on the USS Massachusetts, the Navy's next Virginia-class submarine. She had been working in sales. Labor shortage has pushed the industry to get creative.
My husband was retiring because he's a little bit older than me, so I needed to get some good benefits and still keep a good pay. So I chose the shipyard, and they hired me at 59.
Cupp had only painted around the house before she came to the shipyard. She says she loves it.
I do. I love it. Yeah, I didn't know that I would, but I do. Yeah, because once I get to my job, I can work at my own pace. Obviously sometimes there is a little pressure to get something done quickly, but pretty much you decide how you want to work your area.
The U.S. projects 2.1 million manufacturing jobs will go unfilled by 2030, including the skilled trades who maintain Navy ships, says Joe Frummelt with the Virginia Ship Repair Association.
We're not only fighting against what we need, but we're also fighting against auto repair shops, wind energy, anything that needs a skilled trade. We're fighting those demands that those industries are putting on that whole labor force.
Unlike steel or auto manufacturing, the production of Navy ships isn't likely to be outsourced to other countries. If nothing else, the backlog at the limited number of U.S. shipyards means job stability in the industry. And if that's not enough, the Navy can also lean on patriotism.
There are giants among us. They are the men and women building our Navy's next generation submarines. They are giants in what they do because they work in a place where they can grow.
The Navy is funding the private Blue Forge Alliance, which is sponsoring commercials with Major League Baseball this season. Their goal is to train more than 10,000 manufacturing workers per year over the next decade, just to build and maintain the Navy's submarines. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
Incarcerated people might be able to get out of prison earlier now that the Supreme Court of Virginia is weighing in on how earned sentence credits are calculated. Virginia Public Radio's Michael Pope brings us the latest.
Jose Garcia Vasquez was an inmate at a Virginia prison who spent years earning sentence credits to get out earlier. Credits that can be earned with good behavior or by completing job training classes. But as his release date approached, the Department of Corrections said it had a different way of calculating the credits and that he had to stay in prison 18 months more. Here's Deputy Solicitor General Graham Bryant arguing the case before the Supreme Court of Virginia.
The Department of Corrections followed the General Assembly's instructions as articulated in that statute and correctly declined to award Mr. Garcia Vasquez any enhanced earned sentence credits.
Justices rejected that argument and sided with the inmate, who was represented by ACLU lawyer Vishal Agraharkar.
The job of the Attorney General and the Department of Corrections in this case is to apply the law as it is and as the General Assembly deemed to write into law, and not to interpret it in a way that keeps people wrongfully incarcerated for months, if not years, just because they wish the law were different.
He says Garcia Vasquez is not the only incarcerated person who will benefit from the Supreme Court ruling. Hundreds of people could be released earlier, an approach the Attorney General calls a criminal's first, victim's last policy. I'm Michael Pope.
Virginia Beach State Senator Aaron Rouse says he's running for lieutenant governor in 2025. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reported that story.
Rouse has had a quick ascent up the political ladder. He won a seat on the city council in 2018. He then took over a state senate seat as a Democrat in a tight special election in January 2023, securing the party's control of the state senate. As a state legislator, Rouse has framed himself as a major defender of women's reproductive rights. He's carried some big bills for Democrats, like the one to finally establish a retail market for cannabis in Virginia. Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney announced he's dropping out of the governor's race to seek the nomination for lieutenant governor instead. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The U.S. ambassadors of Poland and Lithuania outlined the urgency of getting aid to Ukraine quickly at an event in Norfolk last week. WHRO's military reporter Steve Walsh covered the story.
The ambassadors spoke Friday at the Sheraton as the House voted to approve aid packages for Ukraine and Israel. Poland's ambassador to the U.S., Marek Maragowski, says there's a sense of cautious relief.
The Ukrainians are now fighting not only for their sovereignty and for their freedom, but for our own freedom of the collective West.
The latest round of aid to Ukraine has been stalled for months as fighting against Russia worsened. Getting arms and aid into Ukraine quickly has been a challenge, says Lithuanian ambassador to the U.S., Audra Pilipety. She says the war has changed the NATO alliance.
It was really eye-opening for all the allies and how fast all nations reacted in assisting Ukraine, and also not only NATO but European Union, all the democratic world.
The ambassadors spoke as part of an event put on by the World Affairs Council of Hampton Roads. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
After the Civil War, a group of former slaves found economic independence harvesting oysters in Suffolk. The community thrived for a century until pollution devastated the industry. WHRO's Katherine Hafner has the story of one woman fighting to keep that legacy alive.
We're in the Chuckatuck Creek. I got about 500 acres out there.
On a warm spring morning, Mary Hill is on a boat working her oyster grounds just north of the Crittenden Bridge. She and two other watermen lower a dredge into the water. The metal cage scrapes the bottom of the oyster beds. Then they raise it up and dump the bounty. To Hill, this is more than just a job. It's her family legacy. These reefs are the same ones her father worked decades ago and his father before him.
This is 7th generation of oyster grounds. So these oysters been sitting here waiting for me. My ancestors waiting for me to come out here.
Those ancestors were formerly enslaved people who moved here from Williamsburg to start a new life after the Civil War. In their new village called Hobson, Hill says the Black oystermen created a flourishing economy.
It became our livelihood, but foremost, it was a pathway to our freedom.
She is now the last of the Hobson watermen and the first water woman. The Suffolk community is one of many around the Chesapeake Bay where African Americans prospered as watermen, but officials say historic resources associated with these sites are quickly disappearing. Last year, they were listed as some of Virginia's most endangered historic places. Retired historian Tommy Boger taught and researched local Black history at Norfolk State University. He says Hobson's founders were part of a Black Union encampment in the Williamsburg area. After the war, white officials saw them as a threat, and they fled.
Some of those Blacks who had gathered in that area had probably escaped from the Suffolk area of Barrett's Neck before slavery fell, and now they were willing to go back home.
They brought knowledge about oystering that they'd gained to help feed their families during slavery. Boger says Hobson's new residents became prosperous and controlled their own properties.
By the 1900s, most of the Blacks were landowners. They were modest homes that they built.
Hill grew up in one of those homes, with lots of land around it where her family farmed and built a church. She recalls Hobson being tight-knit and self-sufficient during her childhood. Life revolved around the water.
I got baptized in the Nansemond River. A lot of us got baptized in the river. It spiritually connected us.
Oystermen plied their trade all winter long. Hill remembers her father using newspaper to insulate his boots and plucking icicles off his head when he got home. Things took a turn in the late 1960s when Hill was about 7 years old. Industrial plants dumped a toxic chemical called ketone into the James River. It polluted the whole watershed and shut down fishing operations. Almost overnight, most of Hobson's watermen had to close up shop. Hill says people had to look outside the village for work.
When the ketone came and devastated our industry, they had no legacy to leave to us.
Hill was one of those who left for a while. She moved back about 25 years ago to care for her aging mother and got interested in the local history. Eventually, she also ventured back out on the water and now sells oysters under the name Barrett's Neck Seafood. It's all possible because Hobson residents refuse to ever give up their oyster grounds.
They believed that those oysters would come back one day for survival. And it is back.
Hill's also fighting to preserve what remains of Hobson back on land. She helped get a highway historical marker, noting the village's importance to African American waterman culture. Standing next to the marker, just across from her house, Hill says it was a good first step, but she doesn't want Hobson to live in the past.
We don't want to be just some people you read about in a history book. We want this to remain a thriving village for future generations. And that's my calling. That's the thing I have to never be willing to give up.
Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Katherine Hafner, Ryan Murphy, Steve Walsh, Michelle Hankerson, and Barry Graham. Virginia Public Radio's Michael Pope and WFAE's Steve Harrison, also Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed. You can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.